Welcome to Delhi Belly, a series of conversations around preventative health for people of South Asian origin. My name's Nikhil Alawalia. I'm a cardiologist and cardiovascular researcher.
I'm Dr. Abhishek Joshi. I'm a consultant cardiologist in London. We're out of our comfort zone quite a lot in some of these more recent episodes, right? We talked about liver disease, which obviously is not heart disease. Now we're going to talk about the thyroid.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the thyroid. And although that organ is not the heart, I would argue that everything links back to the heart. So we will find a way to make thyroid disease a heart problem and why people need to look after their thyroid for many reasons, including for a healthy heart. So I'm going to start you off with another patient story. So we've got a 50-year-old accountant. She is living in Bangalore. And for the last 6 months, she's been feeling tired all the time. She says she's not able to really wake up in the morning, doesn't really have the energy that she had. She thinks her mood is low and she's putting on weight. Her friends and family have told her that it's just the menopause, but even when she went to see the doctor and started on treatment for that, she says these symptoms have continued. She goes on to get blood tests and turns out that she was suffering from subclinical hypothyroidism, which the doctor then monitors and manages. And she starts to feel better as that's starting to improve. So really, I suppose this vignette is a more complete episode, or a complete storyline, because we can see the benefits of treating thyroid. But how often do you encounter thyroid dysfunction in your practice?
It is really common in a couple of areas. And it's really interesting that the hormonal overlap with potentially the menopause, because it happens often in women who are late middle age or early middle age, it can kind of be at the same time, and you get the hot flushes, you get the tiredness, bit of weight gain, not very specific or indistinct symptoms. Those two things can happen about the same time. Where I see it most actually is when people have got really terrifying lipid profiles, like really terrifying lipid profiles that have been measured as part of a health check, and their general practitioner quite rightly refers on to our lipid service, and then we check the thyroid, or the thyroid is checked along the way. And we find that there's been some thyroid dysfunction. And in particular, it can cause very elevated triglyceride levels, which we talked about before, one of the fats that go around your body. And correcting the thyroid function can often go some way to improving triglyceride measurements as well. So that's where I see it most. I think you probably see it as a rhythm doctor in the opposite direction, right? So you probably see overactive thyroids with heart rhythm problems.
Yeah, so the thyroid is an organ in your neck. You can feel it if you press over your neck in some people. And it produces hormones that really regulate your metabolism. So that's like your body's thermostat, which puts your body into a higher energy state or lower energy state. And it's usually pretty good at balancing that throughout your lifetime. Now, when that thyroid organ fails, that can be because the brain is not giving it enough signal to produce that thermostat regulating hormone or enough energy around the body. But as you said, it can cause a lot of problems with the body slowing down. And in Indians, that is the more common way that thyroid disease manifests, in that you don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
So you go hypothyroid.
Okay. But so there are a couple of ways to become hypothyroid, right? One way, which doesn't happen very often, is you just don't eat enough iodine, because that's what the thyroid hormone is made out of. I think that happens in some areas.
We'll come back to that, because that's an important thing for Indians.
And then the other way is that the body's immune system can misrecognize the thyroid and cause damage to the thyroid, which leads it to reduce in its function. And the brain thing you were talking about is then there's an area of the brain that pushes the thyroid hard to try and get it to do more work. And that test being high, i.e. the brain having to push the thyroid, that's the test that we use to diagnose hypothyroidism, right? So if you've got a high level of the hormone coming from the brain and a low level of the hormone coming from the thyroid, then the thyroid must be broken.
Yeah, so thyroid disease is not a one-size-fits-all. There are lots of different conditions, lots of different causes for it. And I guess on the other end of the spectrum, if you turn that thermostat all the way up, you become hyperthyroid, which means you've got high thyroid levels. And that can manifest in the opposite way. So if you think if you've got low thyroid levels, you're slower, you're feeling lower mood, you're sleepier. Then high thyroid levels is the opposite. You have a lot of energy to begin with. You then start to get very anxious. You can have developed tremors. Your heart rate and your heart rhythm can be put into overdrive. You can go into fast, dangerous heart rhythms. And so you really see it on both ends of the spectrum. And I think this case scenario is a really helpful one to say that if you're having symptoms that are non-specific, you don't know what the cause is, you should absolutely get your thyroid function checked, because you need to know that that is not the driver for these non-specific high energy symptoms or low energy symptoms.
And you asked me, and I didn't know the answer. how frequent or how common that is in Indian women.
Yeah, I've got that data actually. Well, in the UK, it's around 2% of individuals, 2.5%. In India, it is. Want to have a guess?
You always do this to me. I'm gonna guess, because life seems really unfair to Indians in health, that it's higher. So I'm gonna go for 5%.
Yeah, so, well, close, but they tested it in 8 big cities around India. So we've got the urban prevalence. So in cities like Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi, Goa, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, and Kolkata, it was found to be 11%.
11%.
So 1 in 10 people had abnormal thyroid function. 8% of them were known and diagnosed, but 4%, which is almost half of that number, were not known.
Okay.
So 4% of the population in these big cities have thyroid disease but don't know about it.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, you just said earlier on that our case had something called subclinical hypothyroidism. To me, subclinical means that it hadn't really manifested as symptoms. It was just kind of hanging out in the background. But she had actually felt a little bit unwell, right? So maybe she's not in that group of people with exactly what doctors call subclinical. Either way, that is a huge number of people with underactive thyroids who don't know about it.
Yeah.
And there must be some consequence of that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it was the people on the landlocked cities, so the ones more inland, who had a higher prevalence of it than the ones by the coast. And we're seeing this sort of 11% number, but you've got to remember that the rules and regulations about iodination of salt were only introduced in the 70s in India.
Okay.
So you said iodine is a fundamental component of normal thyroid function. And up until the 1970s, it was not being replaced routinely in the Indian diet in the way that it was in the West.
Okay.
So up until the 1970s, the population was growing up without this supplementation of iodine. And so the thyroid levels were being affected by not having enough iodine. Now it is much more common for iodine to be added into Indian people's salt. And so maybe if we were to repeat the survey in another 10, 15 years' time, we will see that 11% come down. That's the hope.
That's really interesting. So here in the Western world, the idea that you've got hypothyroidism or low thyroid function because of low dietary iodine is almost vanishingly rare, right? We never think that you've got low dietary iodine. But you're saying to me that in India, possibly it's still due in some areas to low dietary iodine, as well as all the other immune and causes that it could be?
Yeah, exactly. It's not clear. That's one of the explanations, is the late replacement of iodine into salt. The other is perhaps changes in lifestyle and that introduction of iodine, which is causing a surge of autoimmune reactions, which is the body's immune system fighting the thyroid, is surging, but no specific single answer. Just we know that it's more common in Indians.
Yeah, it does sound to me like we really don't actually know, but that it seems like it's more common in that study. I'd be interested to read that. Maybe you could put the link in the bottom and we'll have a discussion in the comments about it. That sounds like the sort of thing our audience might want to get stuck into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem of this condition of subclinical hypothyroid, which you touched on, saying subclinical is a doctor's way of saying, oh, it's not as important because it doesn't have symptoms. Actually, subclinical hypothyroidism is important to detect because we know that those people are still at risk of higher heart disease, higher metabolic disease in the future and over time. So recognizing someone with subclinical hypothyroidism, it may be an association. It may be that if you're having subclinical hypothyroid, you're going to go on to develop clinical hypothyroidism and have these conditions. But that is an alarm bell to say you are at risk or higher risk of future heart problems. Why is that? Let's investigate. Let's treat that.
So tell me, so if you've got low thyroid function, you're saying that it causes future heart problems. So what's the mechanism there? Do we know? Or what are the heart problems that you might get with low thyroid disease?
So we know that when the thyroid levels are low, you're not producing enough of the right cholesterol. You're producing too much of the high cholesterol, which is why those patients end up in your clinic with really high cholesterol. So your cholesterol levels could be a little bit out of whack.
Yep.
Again, observational data. So it shows that people with this subclinical hypothyroidism have markers of stiffer hearts when you scan their hearts. So it may be that those stiffer hearts increase the risk of heart rhythm problems, high blood pressure, things like that. Ultimately, we just know if you have subclinical hypothyroidism, your risk of developing heart attacks and dying in the future is higher than a cohort of people who had no subclinical hypothyroidism. And we can put the links to all these papers in the show notes below.
And that can be reversed, right? That risk. That's why we're talking about it. So if you've got subclinical or actually just low thyroid function with symptoms, it makes you feel unwell. Fixing that and treating it quite simply can reverse those risks.
And the reason we're talking about it here is because in the UK, it's a 2% of the population condition. In Indians, it's 11% of the population. So it's 5 times as common to be a cause of those symptoms of fatigue, tiredness,
Right.
Low mood. So thinking about it and having it higher up in your differential and having a test for it, which is very simple, it's a simple blood test, is something which I think an Indian who's suffering from those symptoms should certainly be considering early on.
And in the health screens that we're talking about, where people go and get checked for their risks of diabetes or their high cholesterol, do you think we should include thyroid function in there, or is thyroid function usually included? I don't know if we do it in the UK. We definitely do it once we see abnormal lipid functions in our practice. And then it's a simple thing to treat, right? There's a drug.
It's a simple thing to treat, simple thing to diagnose. I think the downsides of not checking it are higher than the pros. So I do think if you're thinking about your heart, you're thinking about your long-term health, thyroid should certainly be in the conversation you have with your doctor and getting that checked.
Cool. And then I guess one of the things that we've got to remember, we've talked about the cardiac manifestations, the heart manifestations of thyroid disease. It's a whole body condition, right? So it can affect almost every organ. And we are not going to go into that on this podcast because there are experts out there that can talk to it better. But if you do have hypothyroidism, it's simple to treat, good for your health, and it's important to know because sometimes you don't have symptoms.
Exactly. I think we made that point well.
Great.
Great. See you later.